Hi, thank you. Now for something completely self-indulgent. When I was here 2 years ago, I was talking about a process that had taken me 2 years. I was attempting to create a good old-fashioned traditional paper encyclopedic work by, in a sense, lifting information from the internet, going backwards, in a sense. And it took me 2 years to figure out the absurdity of that, but I didn't finish quite. I gave up the project, but I didn't quite finish explaining what I was talking about then. So I start with a very brief recap. This is the first steam engine on the left. It's a model of a steam engine that was built to remove water from flooded mines so that it was easier for people, especially little kids, to get at that coal and iron and tin and so on and so forth. Watt comes along and improves the steam engine, makes it really a practical device that can run in factories and change literally the face of the industrial landscape. Somebody notices that these are terrific little things, and if they could just be made a little smaller and put on wheels, they could become sources of transportation. And we have two variations, a Trevithick on the left, which is basically taking the chimney from the furnace and running it through the boiler full of water so that the heat of the escaping gases is used to transform the water into steam, which you can then run through a cylinder, and those are improving as well to run pistons and drive trains. The French guy, Seguin, comes along and says, that single pipe is not really very efficient. Let's just reduce it to lots of pipes, and there'll be more surface area to hit the water to convert the water more effectively into steam more efficiently, and so on. Down in the South, in around 1818, in this country, the steam engine catches on as a form of powering or assisting sail-powered boats. Now, the reason is quite simple here. They're looking at the business owners, the ship owners are looking at ways of improving their service to their clients because they see this as a growing market. And but people really, I mean, they like comforts and all that sort of stuff. What they really like to know is actually what day the ship will leave. And more importantly, what they like to know is when it will arrive at its destination. I mean, like within a day is good. 3 weeks, not so good if you're trying to plan ahead. But anyway, here you see them reworking a ship that's already half built and moving a mast back so that they can get a steam engine in there and big paddle wheels on the side. Well, Brunel, who loves these kinds of things, loved them, a brilliant guy, always thought big, convinces his board of directors of the Great Western Railway Company that they should build a ship, a steam-powered ship, to work with their steam-powered locomotives so that passengers coming from London to Bristol can then get on their ship and go all the way to America. He convinces the board of directors of this company 5 years before the first train even arrives from London in Bristol. So he's pretty persuasive. And the ships get bigger. The nice thing about Brunel is he sort of is not afraid to use anyone else's ideas. His first ship is wood, and it's got the paddle wheels on it. His second ship is iron, and it's got a propeller instead of paddle wheels. So he didn't invent either of these things. He just recognized that they were steps in the right direction. I mean, the obvious thing about a propeller is that unless something goes really, really wrong, the propeller will stay in the water. You can't say that about paddle wheels because the thing is rocking back and forth and so on. Anyway, he then decides that he's onto something. Those are like 250-foot-long ships, something like that, maybe 3. He built something 600 feet long, the Great Eastern, and it's a double-hulled ship. One of the things that Brunel does invent, is this notion of the double hull. The idea being that if you're now responsible for 4,000 passengers as opposed to 250, you want to sleep at night. So you do everything you can. The ship is divided into compartments so that if one compartment gets flooded somehow, the water will be contained and the ship will continue to float, that sort of thing. So he's introducing these things in a ship that was a disaster. They couldn't even get the thing launched. The money they had saved to outfit the interior had to be spent on the launch, and it never really worked. But what it did end up doing was helping them lay the transatlantic telegraph cable from Nova Scotia to Ireland. So it did serve a purpose, just not the one he intended. This is the first steel ship, the Servia. It uses an Edison electric lighting system, a lot safer than swinging lamps, with oil and gas and things of that nature when you're at sea. And the engines, of course, as these ships get bigger and bigger, now we're up to about 600 feet, 650. And they're really now reliable ships that will carry lots of passengers across the Atlantic and really build this business. But the engines are 4.5 stories tall, so they're using up more and more of the ship, and they're still using coal, which uses up the rest of the lower area of the ship. And so finally, in 1894, the engines, of course, are becoming more sophisticated as well. This is the SS St. Louis, which is launched in Philadelphia, 1894. And there's a little boy who happens to be in the crowd, brought by his father and accompanied by his younger brother, Frederick, named William Francis Gibbs. And he sees this monster slide down the runway into the slipway, into the Delaware River, and it changes his life. 8 years old. And he says, I want to do ships. I want to build ships. I want something to do with this. And so he becomes obsessed with ships. He's obsessed with Brunel. He's obsessed with the Great Eastern. He goes to Harvard because his father wants him to, have a real career. And between classes, he spends time redrawing plans of British naval vessels and things of that nature. And he begins to develop the dream he has of actually building a 1,000-foot-long ship, an American ship that will be the fastest in the world. He leaves Harvard the first time and travels on the Lusitania and the Mauretania with his brother Frederick to do research, basically. It doesn't matter where the ship ends up, it just matters that they're on it. Eventually, he wins the support of J.P. Morgan Jr., who offers to support this venture, this crazy idea of a 1,000-foot-long ship, because it can be done. And Gibbs's presentation is so effective that he says, "Okay, let's get started on this." But the war intervenes and things of that nature, so it doesn't happen. The project just gets shelved. The idea of putting a very large ship full of very happy people in U-boat-infested waters has lost some of its appeal. And so they go to war, and the first thing that the United States, one of the first things the United States does when it finally enters the First World War is seize a ship called the Vaterland, which is huge. It's 950 feet long. It's a German luxury liner. They seize it. They turn it into a troop ship. The war is over in about a year. The ship comes back, and it sits in Hoboken, New Jersey for about 4 years, just bobbing up and down in the water until United States Lines decides to buy it. And Gibbs is given the opportunity of completely refurbishing it, and he builds his reputation on this project. Now, nothing's gone wrong with the slide. This is actually the image. This is Gibbs's first ship, the SS Malolo. It's his first passenger liner, and it's because of the success of the Leviathan/Vaterland that he got this job. This is a random collision in about 1930 during sea trials for the Malolo. This is when they take the ship out and test it before the owner takes over. And there was a confrontation between the Malolo and a Norwegian freighter in the fog off Nantucket. And because of Gibbs's commitment to safety, it was a 12-compartment ship. 2 of the compartments flooded, but the ship still managed to get back to New York with 7,000 tons of extra water, and was repaired and served out a very long term. Anyway, Gibbs keeps going. He has one success after another. There are some gaps in between and some difficult moments, but eventually he becomes the sort of country's preeminent naval architect who has never studied naval architecture. He has a degree in economics and a degree in law. And he practiced law for 2 years because he promised his father he would before he began this quest to build the longest ship and pre-Morgan. But eventually he and his brother and their company, Gibbs and Cox, is produced something like 75% of the American fleet for the Second World War. So a phenomenal success, but it's not what he wants to do. What he wants to do is build a passenger liner that's the longest and the fastest. He wants to win the Blue Ribbon, which is the award for crossing the Atlantic back and forth faster than anyone else. This is his America. He's holding his SS America. This is only about 700 feet long. What he really wants to do, though, is compete with the Normandy and the Queen Mary and so on and so forth. But he's just not even in the same game until he gets the opportunity to build a ship called the SS United States. And he starts, as you would with a ship like that, building it based on your experience, on what you know, using engines that have been developed to drive aircraft carriers, so he knows he's got a pretty fast ship. He then constructs or has models made of the ship for testing in tanks so that they can make sure the shape of the ship is as good as the engines that will power it. And what he's learned about preparing for the war is that if you build things in pieces in so-called sub-assemblies, you can build them more quickly and actually build them better. And you get a dry dock. You need a dry dock because, well, a couple of reasons. One is he's obsessed with the secrecy of the ship. He doesn't want his competition to know what he's doing with the hull shape and the number of propellers and so on and so forth. So we will build this thing in this huge bathtub. Sub-assemblies come in one after the other, and you begin to see the shape of this thing. The irony, of course, is that it's completely surrounded by wood, the scaffolding and everything around it. And wood was the one thing he would not allow in the ship in the end because he was terrified of fire at sea, which is not anything to joke about. So the ship is divided into compartments, and you can see the bulkheads here that actually divide it like a big ice cube tray. The stern of the ship is the most complicated part because you're dealing with 4 propellers and a rudder. You need to have a maneuverable vessel because, I forgot to mention, this is not just a passenger liner, but in case of war, this becomes a troop ship capable of carrying 14,000 people, which is part of the reason for the ship being only 101 feet wide. It has to be able to go through the Panama Canal because trouble is brewing on the Korean Peninsula. Anyway, this is what the end looks like. And you notice you've got 5 blades on the furthest most back, the aft propeller. I didn't used to speak that way, but because of this project, I've started to. And then the 4 blades on the outer propellers. The idea is that the water is so messed up by the first propellers that hit it that you need an extra blade to get some traction. From the blueprints, I was able to sort of reconstruct this kind of model. These are the things that extend off the ship that support the propeller shafts. I wanted to sort of be able to stand under them. This is the propeller shaft inside the SS United States. And here it is exposed. And in its bearings, this is like 400 feet long from the engine to the outer propeller. This is a piece of the shaft. This is the last piece of the shaft. You can go to Newport News, Virginia, and actually see this. I don't recommend it. But it is a propeller that is, unless you really love propellers and pieces of shaft. But this is an 18-foot diameter propeller. It's quite fantastic. This is the rudder at the end. There's the rudder post sitting on the ground. It's about to be moved up into that hole to connect with the steering machinery. This is the rudder itself, which is about 22 feet high. And here they are. Everything's attached. The bow is its own construction nightmare, but it has to be extremely strong. And so it's also sub-assemblies. This is one of the sub-assemblies. It's made upside down because it's easier to do it that way. You've got molten steel going in a direction that's less dangerous to the person who's doing the welding. You attach these 2 things together. You cut it in half. You flip it over. And you've got the lower part of the bow of the ship being lowered into the dry dock. And the whole sort of assembly, the whole thing is put together that way. I worked through the photographs and plans and tried to sort of reconstruct, to the best of my ability, this sequence of events, which is pretty hard to do because it was a secret thing. And so they did take a lot of photographs, but it still didn't make it easy. Here's the midsection of the ship now. We're building at both ends. We need to get a boiler in there. We're going to need 8 boilers. And this is a piece of one of them. This is the boilers as they stand now. This is just 2 boilers. And they have a few knobs and things to work them with. And here are the 2. This is a little drawing of the 2 of the 4 boilers. There are 4 boilers for every pair of engines. The boilers, you wonder how big they are. They are this size, the size of my house in England that I grew up in. So once I realized that, I thought it was sort of amusing. It seemed like a big house to me because I was only this high. But the engine room is different from all the engine rooms you've seen so far. Remember, they were getting bigger and bigger. Now they can be smaller because we're using steam turbines. And we're using the most sophisticated steam turbines available. They go very, very fast. They're tremendously powerful. They're very efficient, less vibration, and so on and so forth. And the ship continues to grow in the dry dock. This is what it looks like now. You can see the condition of the ship is not great. There are people trying to save it. I hope they succeed. Once you've got your superstructure put on the hull of the ship, which is made of steel, the superstructure is made of aluminum to minimize the weight of the ship for one thing and also the tendency to rock back and forth. You can put on the funnels, which of course I really wanted to see. And so I went up there and we look inside the funnel. This is kind of pitch black in there until you start using your camera. I was pretty happy to get out the top. But this is this empty thing. It's a logo. It's an icon of the ship, of the shipping line. And the only thing that's actually working is that sort of rusty looking thing at the end. Those are the shafts that take the smoke and whatnot from the boilers. So we launched this thing and we have to have a morgue. It's got a 2-person morgue here. And then so we got sea trials. Remember when there was the fog in Nantucket? This is the ship having its sea trials. Its maiden voyage takes off from New York, crosses the Atlantic, first, high speed, first time. This is a fold-out that will appear in this book if this book ever gets done. That's about 6 feet long. And it's arriving here at Southampton, where a family from this street and this house and a kid with this encyclopedia, with this picture of the Empire State Building in it, is moving to the United States, is moving to America. And this kid is very excited because he gets to see this building. He can't believe it. I mean, look at that illustration. It's fantastic. So the journey begins, and here we are, Southampton, my mother, my sister, my brother, and I, 1957, leaving England, and this woman with her Rembrandt wrapped in brown wrapping paper and this nuclear cloud hairdo stands right in front of me while I'm, trying to have my one picture taken of getting on the ship. So anyway, I have Photoshop Elements only because it came with my scanner. I don't know how to use anything more sophisticated than that, but I got rid of her. And so we get on this ship, and imagine coming out of this huge brick building. You've been in there for 2 hours, and they're checking your passports and papers and all this sort of stuff. And in front of you is this. I mean, it was just staggering. So we get on the ship, and we are in tourist class. We're shown to our cabin, which is small but cozy. And there's nothing to do. Fortunately, tourist class has a movie theater, and I think they must have known at United States Lines that the second largest group of passengers, which happened to be tourist class, if they get unruly, they're going to be a problem. This may not be true with first class, but it must be true with tourist class. So we better give them their own movie theater. This was our little deck. And we would hang out on the deck from time to time and look at the horizon just to make sure it was still there. It always was, 4 days of horizon. And then the movies, every day, 3 times a day, I'd go to the movies. Same movie. And first run features Walt Disney's Perry and Pajama Game. Or I would sit on the deck and stare up at the bridge and hope that the captain or somebody up there would see me and take pity on me and invite me up to see how the ship runs and stuff like that. Well, he never did. He probably didn't want to take his eyes off the traffic. So it was a lot of horizon for a long time. Every day was pretty much like every other day, except for the fact that they keep setting the clocks back an hour, which, if you were my mother, who was seasick for the whole time, was just a torture. But anyway, gala night. I have played with the color of her face a little bit to be a little bit more realistic. But this is gala night. This is last night on the ship, and we have this fancy dinner and party hats. The next morning, I come up, and there are trees and there are buildings on the horizon that has, for 4 days, been uneventful. And at the same time, I didn't realize this, of course, but on the Brooklyn side of the Verrazano Narrows, William Francis Gibbs is standing there. His driver has brought him, and on his way to work, and he stands there and he watches his ship come in every time it returns from a transatlantic voyage. And it's the first time and only time he and I ever stood face to face. A quarter of a mile apart, yeah, but still face to face. And we come into New York, and I see the Empire State Building. Look at this photograph. This really says it all. Now, okay, what did I expect? I expected this. What I got was this. I was robbed. I was cheated, and it took me a long time to get over that. We got through New York, and it wasn't until we got to New Jersey that I could sort of look back and see in the skyline that it was a fairly sizable building, but it was nothing like the picture had led me to believe. So, fairly recently, like last week, I decided to compensate a little bit and to create a more accurate image here. So that's the size of the building as it actually does exist. And just in case you've missed it, I mean, it's 3.5 miles from the Bowery, from the waterfront. So it's not really surprising. But the damage was done, and I think that you can tell in these photographs that it's kind of permanent. So, thank you.